Hello and welcome to the CBB Supershow. I'm your host, Waddell, aka Dub Deuces 85, and I'm of course coming to you live on the West Coast on the world famous FTN Network. You can see directly above my head there on the banner, FTN Network presents the CBB Super Show. College basketball, my friends, is chaos, absolute chaos. And if you don't love it, I just don't know if there's any hope for you. I don't know if you are built for the long grind of a season that is college basketball and such an enjoyable time. Just today, on Tuesday, December the 19th, not only do we have a multiple overtime game, not only do we have a buzzer beater from the Montana State Southern Utah game, Brian Garacki hitting this crazy three-pass air and three-pointer, like just crazy, extraordinary stuff, right? And then there is another buzzer beater, crazy in the UNC Greensboro game. The last 15 seconds, multiple lead changes, just absolute chaos. I don't know how you couldn't love college basketball. They say baseball is the romance sport, but college basketball is just a whole nother level. And I honestly, at this point, anyone who says that college basketball is atrocious, how can they watch this? I just don't know how people could have that take. And meanwhile, you're watching glorified pickup basketball at the NBA level, where none of the games seem to matter until the playoffs or the in-season tournament. I mean, they have an in-season tournament now, so that's great. But the tournament. They're getting excitement for the NBA with a tournament format. Wonder what other sport uses a tournament like that. College basketball is the best sport. Come on, let's go. DVP, that's what we like here. Tonight's results were very mixed results galore. There was a very atrocious looking basketball game from the Indiana Hoosiers. How they were able to win that game, I don't know. They definitely did not deserve to beat Morehead State. Morehead State definitely deserved to win that game. Jordan Lathon just burying three after three after three. One of the worst games you'll see from Cal Ware, allowing the NAIA superstar that is Riley Minix to bully him on the glass. Malik Renew, awful. Foul trouble all game long. And Mackenzie Mbako was decent for a while, but overall awful. The guard play was awful. How Indiana got that win, you ask? Well, Anthony Walker, who I continue to tell you, my friends, was good 2 to 3 years ago, and nobody believes me, had a monster game, 18-9. Had the game that those stats should have obviously gone to Cal Ware. They didn't. Not the best results there for Cal Ware. But you know what was very good results, and we talked about it on last night's slate with the Virginia game and how the DVP front court players just continue to assault Virginia. Memphis, it's a little bit tough to really get behind because we know that, Nick Jourdain's going to start. He's going to get some minutes, but he's going to be very irregular. There's going to be fouls. Malcolm Dandridge is going to start, but irregular. Ashton Hardaway, I guess. They don't really have a front court option. To test the theory of the DVP and just how dedicated I am to that portion of our CBB strategy, I did play Malcolm Dandridge in my main lineup. 3%. He was 5K, something like that. A monster game. 27 fantasy points. For him, a monster game. 9 points, 8 rebounds. Did have 3 steals, which I admit obviously bumped it up. But we look at what he did in 21 minutes of action. 9 points, 8 rebounds, 2 assists. That gets it done at 5K all day long. We continue to be on this Virginia DVP. People are behind the times on Penn State. Take front court players against Penn State. Virginia has no front court. David Jones also nuked them because they had to put Ryan Dunn, who is basically their best front court defender, and that's not really his position, right? He's not the natural 5, but he's having to play these minutes there because Jake Groves is not, a banger. Jordan Minor's giving them nothing. I was certainly wrong there. I thought Jordan Minor, coming from Merrimack, was actually going to give them quality minutes. He's not. And basically what happened was Dunn had to defend what little front court Memphis had, which allowed David Jones to just run completely unchecked. He had 26 real points. Memphis blows the doors off of Virginia. Virginia's in trouble. this Virginia team's in trouble because they can't score. And if a team scores and gets hot, we know that they're not going to be able to keep up. Isaac McNeely was completely handcuffed. The main thing I want you to take away here is that Virginia DVP is strong and people are just going to continue to ignore it. Their next three opponents are Morgan State, Notre Dame, and Louisville. Not the who's who of front court players, but I think that Louisville game, we're going to be tested if it's on the slate, and we're going to have to strongly consider one Brandon Huntley Hatfield. So we'll just hope that game's not on the slate. But if it is, I don't know how we can fade him. All right, we have a 7-game slate on tap. As Alex there says, hey, what's up, man? It says fire slate. There's banger after banger game here. You know, a lot of neutral court action. The second half of the Jordan Invitational between Oklahoma and North Carolina. We have Duke taking on Baylor in the Madison Square Garden, the mecca of college basketball. We have a semi-home game between Arizona and Alabama. That game carries a total of 173.5, a massive, massive total there. Not a lot of defense expected, a lot of offense. Clearly, we're going to talk about that game heavily. We have some conference matchups here, Villanova, Creighton, Xavier, St. John's, UConn, Seton Hall. And then we have this really kind of ugly game of Arizona State versus Northwestern. But we're going to talk about it all. If you're watching live or on demand, please support the show by hitting the like button, sharing on your social media, and interacting both on live show and on demand. I always circle back around to check comments, and I interact with you guys throughout the show as well. We talk about DFS here in a game-by-game breakdown format. We talk about prize picks, props, betting, anything and everything to do with college basketball. We're here to entertain and win you money. Green screens, walk to the window, all that good stuff. Let's do it. All right, first game on the slate, Baylor versus Duke. This is a big one. What's up, Don? How you doing, my man? North Carolina versus Oklahoma. I think North Carolina money line. What do you think? Yeah. That's going to be a good one. I don't know, man. I kind of like Oklahoma there, but we'll get into that here in a second. Duke is 2-point favorites over Baylor, 142 and over under the Duke Blue Devils, coming off a win over Hofstra, in which they absolutely dominated, and a win over Charlotte, and the recent loss back-to-back to Arkansas and Georgia Tech. Baylor coming off their first loss of the season against Michigan State. That game took place in Detroit, technically not a home court for Michigan State, but might as well have been. 88-64, an embarrassing loss, one in which I did not see coming. Otherwise, Baylor has just rolled through opponent after opponent. But it is important to note, Scott Drew's crew, their best win looking like an early season win over Auburn and a win over Florida. But they have wins over Seton Hall, Oregon State, Gardner-Webb, and UMKC, which obviously none of those are going to hold up at the time of tournament resume talk. Baylor, fourth in offensive efficiency. They are the best three-point shooting team in the country. Duke, ninth in offensive efficiency, 33rd in defensive efficiency. They don't turn the ball over all that well. They're a middling three-point defense, and they get a ton of their shots blocked. One area of Duke's game that we're not accustomed to seeing, them getting pounded on the inside. One thing about Duke is Kyle Filipowski, who's currently second on the Ken Pom Player of the Year rankings. He is somebody you can rely on when they are facing lesser tier teams. He does the job. 40% usage rate in that Hofstra game, 28 points, 11 rebounds. Coaching staff, specifically John Shire, allowing him to run extra minutes there in the blowout. They will need him heavily against this Baylor team that does have some front court presence in that can slow him down to a degree, possibly even cause some fouls. But Filipowski is definitely one of the pay-ups on this slate we should certainly be considering. When you look at the top five price guys, RJ Davis, Joel Soriano, Baylor Shireman, Tristan Newton, and Flip, I certainly like Soriano the best out of that group, but Filipowski at 10-3 has to be considered as a strong, high-usage player who, if anybody on this Duke team is going to perform against a tough Baylor squad, it would be him. Tyrese Proctor still has the questionable tag, dealing with the ankle issue. Those can be tricky, so we'll see what happens with him. At 6'7", he's not in play either way. Even if he does go, it's mainly just a matter of if he doesn't go, what that starting lineup will shake out to be. Now, we saw a real nice game out of Caleb Foster against Charlotte when he started to play 29 minutes. Played 28 minutes as a starter against Hofstra, 9 points, 4 rebounds, playing just about the 25 to 30 minutes. So without Proctor, he's certainly another guy to consider. He's only 3.8K. Certainly don't love him against that Baylor defense, but a guy at 3.8 playing heavy minutes. We saw today with Miles Stute, who's awful, not a great basketball player, only 4-1 for South Carolina, major foul trouble, didn't really do all that well. He was like 68% owned on a large slate in single entry. Disgusting, I know, but that's the world that we're living in here. So I could see Caleb Foster without Proctor being relatively highly owned. And I don't mind that play at 3.8 because he can't necessarily do a ton of damage to your lineup if he doesn't pan out. If he gives you 2 to 3x, I think you feel pretty decent about it overall. Other than that, Jared McCain at 5.7, very nice option. I think he's a guy that will be asked to step up here. Obviously, I think a lot of people and would say that Jeremy Roach is going to be the guy to handle this pressure, and he will be. But with that attention on Roach and Flip, it allows Jared McCain to usually draw the weakest part of the defense. And you see he's taken a ton of shots recently, has scored 24 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 4. Looking at his rates, the freshman here, 21% shot rate, shooting 44% from long range. So lethal out there. Does have a solid steal rate over 2.5%. And again, playing more minutes here as the season goes on. 5.7K. That's a range we have been able to fill out our lineups with. We definitely like Jared McCain. Roach at 7.1. That just always feels like too high of a price for me anytime he's over 7. I know he has put up 30 plus in 4 straight. 2 of his last 3, he's put up 40. So I suspect people will kind of get googly-eyed when looking at his logs. He is going to play every single minute in a game like this, but I just don't mind being underweight on him at this price point. I'm not that confident in him as others are, and I don't think he's a worthwhile play at 7K with the other options that we have available. And then lastly, you have my guy, the sophomore, second-year player, Mark Mitchell, playing good basketball lately. Almost 30 fantasy points in back-to-back games, 33 minutes and 26, and that was in 2 semi-blowout games. He took 16 shots against Hofstra. We love to see it. Mitchell, all the shots in the world. This kid is a McDonald's All-American. People forget just how good he is. If Mitchell was on another team, let's say like Dayton with Deron Holmes or, Arizona State, for example, like he would be putting up just ridiculous numbers. He'd be an 8, 9K player, and everybody would be like, I can't fade Mark Mitchell, but he's on this Duke team with other mouths to feed. He's in a system that doesn't allow him a lot of freedom, but we're starting to see him take more shots, and hopefully that's going to be something that continues because I think Duke's a lot better when Mark Mitchell is playing well. So at 6.1, he is a little bit of a sneakier option there for us. On the Baylor side, Ray J. Dennis at 8K, have to love him. He is a high-volume guy playing lots of minutes. High assist rate, comes over from Toledo. Doesn't have the most, sexiest log, but they've been involved in a ton of blowout games, especially in that last one against Michigan State. Like, that was a pretty big outlier game. I think you see them bounce back. You see Ray J. Dennis get more into his, 32, 35 fantasy point range, playing lots of minutes. He's certainly the number 1 Baylor option for me. Obviously the most expensive, but he's just a very safe play overall in this matchup. Other guards to form this trio, Jacoby Walter, who is the freshman, sitting there at 6'3". That is a nice price, pretty tasty. Had the down game against the Spartans. He's had a few down games here recently. He is a freshman, so he's still going through those ups and downs. That's going to be happening. At the end of the day, we're still working with college kids here, and sometimes it's easy to forget, man, why is this guy, why is he shooting 2 for 20 today? Why is he not taking any shots? Why is he Fitbitting? You really have to remember what you're dealing with here. And there are so many life factors and outside factors that can really, pop up here. But this is a really big matchup. Kids dream of beating Duke, if not playing for Duke. And this will be a game that he's up for here. And especially playing in the Garden, like, come on. 6'3" is a great price for Jacoby Walter. I absolutely love him. I think that's a price point that does see him get a pretty big increase in ownership. Looking at his rates overall, 25.2% shot rate. That is the highest on the team. 40% from long range, 45 attempts. He is definitely crushing it and playing as good, if not better, than Key George from last year. 3 other players on the team, actually 4, shooting over 40%. 46% for Ray J. Dennis from long range. Jaden Dunn, 43%. Jalen Bridges 46, and Langston Love 40%. So a myriad of 3-point options. If Baylor's shot is falling, they are hard to beat with all of those options. You look at the Michigan State game, they only shot 31% from long range, 6 of 19. That's not going to get it done for them. They also got absolutely 8 on the boards. They could not rebound a lick. They turned it over a ton as well. 21 turnovers, just overall a really bad performance. I think they shake it off here and do beat Duke. +2, sprinkle the money line, all that good stuff. I'm a big fan of Baylor here, and I do think that they win. We'll be interested to hear what Randall says about this game in the morning, but I am backing Baylor all day long. I'm also a resident Duke hater, so you have to take that for what it's worth, but I am definitely feeling good about Baylor. Other options, the secondary tier, Jaden Nunn is 4.7. That's a good price. He has really kind of struggled, and I think it's important to note with Nunn that his role last year for VCU in the first 2 seasons was to be a spot-up shooter, defender, 3-and-D type player. He's not creating his own shot. He's not creating for others. He's just really having to generate offense from his defense and then allow others to create, getting it off of double teams or, driving kicks. So he's very good at shooting threes. He's very good at defending. He's very good at drawing fouls, creating for others and himself, not so much. And that's why you're seeing some of these low games. He's only hit 20 fantasy points per DK scoring once since November 22nd. So just under a month here. So it's not great, but 4.7 is definitely a price point that can pull us in here. We want exposure to Nunn. We want exposure to several of these Baylor players. Honestly, Duke games have been pretty fantasy friendly for both sides. And I do like Nunn here a lot, especially considering the fact that he's probably going to take 8 or 9 shots at that 4.7 price point. We don't need to worry about his peripherals as much at this price. When he's up there at 6K, that's a different story. He's a little bit tougher to justify there. I do think we see him pop in quite a bit of shots, and if he shoots roughly his average 40%, 45%, he's going to have a nice afternoon, nice night. So 4.7 for Jaden Nunn. Absolutely. He has been splitting minutes with Langston Love. We saw Love couple of games ago spike and play 27 minutes against Michigan State. He played 18, -1. You never want to see a bagel on your roster. That's tough. But when you get a negative score, there's something about that cuts to your core, your soul, getting that negative number. So if anyone rostered Langston Love, that's a tough scene. But he's only 4.3. 3 straight poor games. Prior to that, against Florida, he had 23. Against Nicholls State, he had 28. He is certainly a guy that I would suspect will play around 20, 22 minutes. Even splitting with Nunn, both of those guys have to be in consideration at those prices and their roles in this offense. And then lastly, that leaves us with the front court, which is Jalen Bridges at 6.3. It's a fine price for him. I think, he's not a fouler. He is not much of a banger either. He does hit threes with reckless abandon. I don't mind his game at 6.3, but he's really not going to be very good for this particular matchup. So I would leave him off your player pool. Yves Missy, the freshman, at 5.7. If he can avoid foul trouble, and that's a big if, he can definitely have a nice game here against Duke and rack up the rebounds, but it's going to be a very tough thing for him to do, especially having to defend at times Kyle Filipkowski. So I'm really just looking at those 4 guards between Dennis, Walter, solid name, Nunn, and Love. I would love to be able to say, everyday Jonathan Chamois, but he's just not playing enough minutes. He's never really healthy. I would suspect he'll see a spike in minutes just because they'll need his fouls against Filipkowski, but that's not going to generate fantasy points by any means. And then you have Caleb Lohner all the way down there at near min price, was very good for a couple of years with BYU, not seeing the minutes here. His new role for Baylor, it just hasn't been panning out for him, so it's hard to use him. And then you have D'Antoine Grimes, roughly 7 to 10 minute bench guy at 3.6. Needs an injury to be effective, but you see against Nicholls, he put up 21 quick fantasy points in 7 minutes. He also can shoot and contribute on the offensive side of things. Baylor has just got a plethora of guards. Next game on the slate, UConn versus Seton Hall. We have it a 9.5 point spread, 140.5 total here. UConn should take care of business. I've been very, uninspired by Seton Hall the last couple of games. They ended up beating Monmouth, which, they probably shouldn't have been beaten Monmouth. They didn't defend Xander Rice very well. Jack Collins was crushing them. Kadari Richmond and Dre Davis were worthless. The freshmen off the bench, Isaiah Coleman and Malachi Brown for a stint, really kind of turned the tide in that game and allowed them to win. And then they had a nice, technically neutral court win over Missouri recently, but Missouri's playing almost as bad as they are. This is not a Seton Hall team that impresses me. Ken Pom does have it 77-67 in favor of UConn. I do like minus 9.5. I think UConn wins by like 15 or more against the Seton Hall team. I really do. I'm really not that impressed with them, and I can't imagine them hanging with UConn. That's just my take on it. I think at this point we can safely avoid Kadari Richmond. He is fouling a bunch. He's still the highest usage guy on the team. He's going to facilitate. He's going to take lots of shots. He contributes in all categories. His price is coming down to around that 8-4 range, but UConn's defense is going to give him trouble, and I just think he's going to continue to get into some kind of foul trouble, and he's going to turn the ball over a ton against them as well. 8-4 is just not quite cheap enough in a matchup like this. If he were to be going up against St. John's in a more favorable spot, I would probably consider him highly here. We generally see Kadari Richmond be pretty chalky whenever he's on the slate, but I'm okay being underweight on him compared to the rest of the slate. He's just not going to be the guy for me. The rest of the starting lineup includes Dylan Adewusu, who at 6'2" has to be considered after dropping the 43 against Mizzou. A total GBP play, a floor of literally 2, a upside, high ceiling of 50 perhaps. Not the best spot for him here. He's been relatively ineffective. He was terrible against Monmouth. Got benched for Isaiah Coleman. Ends up playing majority of the game against Missouri and panning out quite well. That's been the MO of him throughout his career at St. John's. He always had these up and down performances. Really tough to trust. Don't have a lot of love for anyone else on this roster. Dre Davis, guard forward eligibility, playing lots of minutes, I suppose, but I think we can do better. I still want to keep an eye on the freshman Isaiah Coleman. I think they're going to have to eventually give him this 25 to 30-minute role. Better to do it now than later, especially when you have guys kind of wasting spots in Alamir Dawes, who I know just had a big game. So whatever, but still Alamir Dawes, all you can really do is shoot. Coleman needs to get that run. He's only 3'7". Just kind of keep him in the back of your head there for later. UConn Huskies. What are we thinking here on the freshman who hasn't started since returning from injury, Stephen Castle? Only 19 minutes against Gonzaga, 18 against Pine Bluff, and then 10 against North Carolina. Drops his price down to 5'8". That's the cheapest he has been. That is a really, really appealing price and an excellent buy low spot. Now, if he's starting, we're going to see heavy chalk. I think that's just kind of goes without saying. So the best bet here for us is if he doesn't start, but we feel confident that he's going to see 20 to 25 minutes and he's going to perform against a Seton Hall defense that is not going to stop UConn very much. Castle is uber athletic, a surefire NBA draft pick when he decides to come out, high level first round pick. 5'8" offers a lot of upside. I know he has been very lackluster since returning from that injury, but 5'8", come on. That's just such a good price there for Castle. He's not a core play, but he's high up the priority list for me and probably a fringe core. I won't be coring him at the end of the show, but I mean, Jesus, that's just such a good price. Looking at his rates, 27% usage rate, 23% shot rate. He does have the highest usage rate on the team, tied actually with Donovan Clingan. He has a 26% combined rebounding rate, 27% assist rate, 3.5% steal rate, 2% block rate, drawing almost 6 fouls per 40. The only thing he doesn't do particularly well is shoot threes, but they do have Cam Spencer and Alex Caravan for that, and to a degree Tristan Newton, so he doesn't have to. Can defend multiple positions, needs to be on the floor. It's only a matter of time before he shakes that rust off and claims back his starting spot, which has been manned by Solo Ball the last month of the season. Circle Stephen Castle there and keep an eye on that starting status. Regardless, he has to be somebody that if you're running multiple lineups, you better have exposure because you're going to feel real bad if he ends up going off and you have 0. The rest of the UConn group and what they've been running as starters, again, for the last basically month of the season: Cam Spencer, Tristan Newton, Alex Caravan, Solo Ball, who's the other freshman, and Donovan Clingan. Besides Castle, who's coming off the bench for now, and Hassan Diarra, who's in there to come out and shoot threes. They don't really utilize much of their bench. Jalen Stewart, who is the other freshman from their vaunted class and Seattle native, doesn't play very much, is still too raw. He's playing a position that puts him behind Spencer and Caravan, just going to be how it is. And Samson Johnson, who is a front court player who gets minutes if Donovan Clingan gets into foul trouble, or they decide to go with double bigs, which doesn't happen very often. So not a lot to look at on the bench besides Castle. Newton's a bit pricey for me at 9.9. I do think this is a game he could absolutely just terrorize Seton Hall and put up one of his 40s. But more often than not, I think he's going to be under that 35 range. So at 9.9, I'm not that interested in him as a pay up. That's just a little bit too of a higher opportunity cost for me. Donovan Clingan does have the upside at 7.8. I think against Seton Hall's front court, he can absolutely shred. We saw him against Gonzaga in 27 minutes. Put up 21 and 8. That was the Donovan Clingan, performance that we had been waiting for. He had a 29 and 7 game against New Hampshire a few weeks before that, but that was against a very lower tier opponent. Gonzaga, I wanted to see it against a team like that. I do think he's got to be considered in play here against the Seton Hall front court. I think he's going to end up fouling everybody out in the front court. So things will be really easy for him on the glass and when he goes to work on the block for his offensive game. Other options, Caravan at 7.2. He's just an okay, play at that price, has upside, kind of a luxury play, right? Cam Spencer at 7.4, also a luxury play, although he's kind of in that Cam Jones range where you just know he's going to take a ton of shots. He's generally going to be around 30-ish fantasy points. He represents a safe option. We saw a ton of busts tonight. We're going to see a ton of busts tomorrow. Spencer is somebody that you can certainly consider if you end up in that range and you're not sure about the Castle play and you're not really wanting to go up to Newton, then Spencer is certainly a guy that you can get and feel pretty good about. Xavier versus St. John's. This is the game that's going to have all sorts of fantasy goodness here. There's a couple, but this one especially. St. John's is 5.5-point favorites. The total is 157. Starts immediately for me, Joel Soriano. I have been really having a hard time with pay-ups. Anyone over 9K has just been brutalizing me this year. For whatever reason, I am just getting cracked over the dome with my pay-ups. But when I see a matchup like this for Soriano, who has been so good for so long throughout the course of his career, Fordham, St. John's, under a different coach, that, Psycho Mike, now he's under Patino. He is just really, really good. A dominant, classic, collegiate front court player. The nice thing about the last 2 games is the guards are actually working to get him the rock. And you see when that happens, good things happen. They absolutely dominated his former team in their last game out. Couple of games against Boston College on the road. He had 37, 21, and 11, 3 straight double-doubles, 35 minutes of action against that Boston College team. He is just a phenomenal player. I think he's got to be considered the top, for me at least, overall pay-up option on this particular slate. I really think he's going to do some serious damage here. The frustrating part about St. John's sometimes is there's too many mouths to feed. The pecking order is undefined. You have Jenkins taking shots. Ledlam thinks he's the star. Dingle's still trying to find his shots. There's just so many guys, and they all need to realize they're at their best, similar to what Purdue does, when they get their big guy the ball. And when they do, he absolutely rakes. So this Xavier matchup is elite for him. He should have no problem working through their front court. When you look at Xavier playing at the 58th fastest tempo, they do have a top 30 defense, but their rebounding numbers are very mediocre for the most part. We've seen some pretty big performances by front court players against them. So I'm a big Soriano guy here. I think he's absolutely the nut play. Looking at his rates overall, he's not going to have the highest usage rate on the team. He does have a 23% usage rate, 22% shot rate, but one of the highest efficiencies and true shooting percentage in the Big East, has a 16.6% offensive rebounding rate. That's top 20 in the country. A combined rate of over 40%, block rate of 7%. He's even making some threes this year, 7 of 9, 77%, obviously only taken 9 attempts. But again, another big guy that if you leave open out there, he's going to take it and hit it. And he never took threes at any other point of his career. This is the first season in which he's doing so, and he is hitting a few. So watch out, Soriano, a little bit more versatile. Going to be a tough cover for Xavier. As far as the rest of the options, they're mostly GPP looks for me. Ledlam at 6'8" has massive upside. I think he's a fantastic overall GPP large field play for the Jam, perhaps, but he cannot touch your main lineup. he disappears far too often, way too streaky, goes through these cold stretches where he's taking 18 shots, making 4 of them. That's where St. John's, to me, is at their worst, when they are allowing Ledlum to take all these bad shots and not working the ball to Soriano. But at 6'8", he does have upside, and I recognize that. Dennis Jenkins at 6'7", strong option, very safe against the Xavier team. Guards against Xavier have also done quite well, especially lead guards. Jenkins is clearly alpha on this team, not named Joel Soriano, has the ball in his hands an awful lot. Highest usage rate on the team at 25.6%, does have an assist rate of 36.3%, which is top 25 in the country, and a steal rate of 4.3%. As far as anyone else, we're still looking for Jordan Dingle to show us any semblance of consistency or blow up. He kind of did it a couple of games ago. He had 17 points, knocked down 3 triples, just hasn't really been able to get us acclimated to what St. John's is trying to do in this upper tier play. When he was on Penn, he was just an absolute monster. Highest shot rate in the country, pretty much. One of the highest usage rates. Everything about Jordan Dingle's game in the Ivy League at Penn was phenomenal. He did come off the bench against Fordham in that last one after starting the last 8. So that is an important note to look at there. At 5'6", he's in play, but I'd feel a lot better knowing that he is actually starting. That was a blowout game as well. So they were able to allow him some time off there to think. It would have been better, I would have said, to play him through that blowout to give him some more confidence, especially coming off the 3 for 15 game against BC, where he couldn't hit the broadside of a barn. But that 5'6" price point is certainly intriguing to me. Then you have a bunch of cheap guys who are going to play typically 15 to 20 minutes. Glenn Taylor has played 30 minutes in 2 of his last 4, but there's no rhyme or reason there. Blowout games, he has seen less. Closer games, he's seen more. At 4-2, he is certainly worth a look. In the Fordham game, he did start. Sean Conway also started while Dingle came off the bench. Ledlum, Soriano, and Jenkins, your other starters. So there is merit to using Glenn Taylor there as a cheap starter, but I'm certainly not very comfortable with him. He's far from a slam dunk play. He's not playing any sort of role like he did at Oregon State, where he was more of a semi-alpha. On the Xavier side, we've been using Desmond Cloud pretty much all season. His price is up there over $7K now, which makes it a little bit more difficult. You'll see at the beginning of the season, we were having him at $5K, 5.6, 5.1. Easy plug and play at those prices. Relatively safe option. Still going to give you mid-20s fantasy points, but at 7.3, there is an opportunity cost there. Not a priority play. Neither is Quincy Oliveri. High shot rate for this team. Big-time scorer. Just has the green light to continue to chuck. 34 real points a couple of games ago, 27 and 22. The Cincinnati game, he was especially good. 6 for 14, 27 points, 2 rebounds, on his way to 34 fantasy points. It's just too high of a price for me at 8K against the St. John's team. I do think he can definitely produce, but again, can we pay cheaper for someone to match him on a X value or raw standpoint? I think the answer is certainly going to be yes. And the third guard in their lineup, Davian McKnight, who has been playing really well. Because of how well he's played, his price has shot back up to 7K. Again, a very high opportunity cost. So none of those 3 are in my player pool as of now, but they are worth a gamble or a shot in GPP because they're going to take a lot of shots and they are going to be in the game for most of the time. Even our little value play that was Abu Osman up to 6'8" with his performances lately, I think he's probably going to be getting in foul trouble against Soriano quickly, so I'm not looking to use him. Again, we've been having him at 5'2", 5K, 4.8. Now seeing that his price is up to 7K, that's just a really, really tough ask for anyone. Really, the main guy I want to use is Trey Green, but he has, since the Bryant game where he came through for us, he's fallen off a cliff and only played 4 minutes in each of the last 3 games. So really, the Xavier side is low priority for me. I'm all over Joel Soriano. Don't mind Ledlum or Jenkins or Glenn Taylor for GPP purposes. ASU versus Northwestern. We have Northwestern as 4.5-point favorite, total of 136.5. Northwestern is an interesting team. People are starting to understand that Brooks Barnhizer maybe not the guy that you should be paying $8K plus for. And I know this is another matchup against ASU that theoretically he should do well in. He's priced at 8-1. He's still putting up about 30 fantasy points a game. He spiked against Detroit with 43. So I know people are really, goo-goo and really over this guy. He was 8-9 against Purdue, and people were plugging him in at that price. And it's way, way too high for Brooks Barnhizer. I do ultimately think he's going to end up being a non-con hero, meaning once they get into more conference games, he's going to get stuffed into a locker more often than not. That price is going to have to come down far, far more before I really consider using him. Rates are great, 24% usage rate, 23% shot rate, 20.7% defensive rebounding rate, also has strong block and steal rates. Only 26% from long range. It's not so good there. But this matchup against ASU is definitely a spot where he could produce. But I will not be using him. If he's chalk, I'm okay being underweight. If he beats me, it's one of those things where I'll just pat my opponent on the back and move on to the next day. Brooks Barnhizer is not a priority play for me at 8-1. Boo Buie at 8-6. That's a real high price for him. We've seen him throughout the course of his career. It feels like a decade now, right? We know he can break the slate. We know he can break your lineup in a bad way. It just really depends on how his shooting is. That's going to determine a lot. He's going to play the whole game, which is something that we can be confident in. He does have a one-off game here or there where he'll get into early foul trouble and really ruin things. But at least we know the volume's going to be there. So if you do decide to pay up for Buie, you're going to get 15 plus shots. You're going to get 5 plus assists. You're going to get 3 plus rebounds. Like, he's a relatively safe look. It's just a matter of how much over that 4X number can you get from him in this spot. And I do think ASU's played a lot better than people realize and do have the chops to maybe frustrate him a little bit. Of all the options on this team, I still like Ryan Langborg more, but he's not a main team guy at 6'8" for me either. Although he is playing really well lately. With the Barnhizer, leveling off of his production, we've seen Langborg start to step up more. Last year in the tournament for Princeton, he was a very clutch option for us. They're playing him just about every minute of the game. He's taken a ton of shots as well, and he's in there to shoot threes, and he's been doing very well, shooting 44% on 55 attempts. So really has come on into this team and gotten acclimated into the rotation right away, like Ryan Langborg. Now, we had a real nice performance from Nick Martinelli the other night against DePaul. Sub 4K option, 16 points, 5 rebounds, played 24 minutes. I was actually a little surprised he was like 5% owned. And I know that the game against Detroit, he had 36 and maybe it looked like a one-off. I wasn't really looking at that game as the reason why we rostered him. It was more that, hey, the value on this slate is a little spotty. We need somebody. Martinelli's minutes are trending up. Matthew Nicholson, who is a big-time non-con hero early in the season, had some pretty nice performances, but he's generally not going to be a guy that offers a whole lot. His minutes are starting to trend down. Martinelli's are trending up, and now I think they're into kind of like a 50-50 thing in the front court. So Martinelli's price came way up after the last game. Unfortunately, it's 4.8, which does give me slight pause. But ultimately, I think he's still a value option that we can use in our main lineup because he is a sub 5K forward that I do think is going to continue to see 20 to 25 minutes and possibly more here, especially if it's a game where Nicholson gets into foul trouble. But Martinelli just clearly has talent and should be on the floor more, and I think we're going to see that continue to come to fruition. Nicholson, 7-footer, Martinelli, 6'7", but I just love the way that Martinelli plays. He's a lot more versatile, and he just offers them a little bit more on offense as well. And I'm not on Ty Berry. I get asked about Ty Berry just about every slate. You see he'll have those pop games, but overall, Ty Berry, same thing as Boo Buie. He can really hurt your lineup. 5.2 is a fine price for him if you want to go down that route, but you do not get the right to complain when he delivers you a 6 fantasy point performance. On the ASU side, all about Jose Perez, 6'9". I think he is an excellent overall all-format play. Northwestern defense is certainly tough. I think they'll be keyed in on Frankie Collins, similar to the way that TCU did. Frankie Collins coming into the TCU game was just on a absolute tear. Felt 39, 37, 44, 36 fantasy points in 4 straight. And then TCU just got up on him, did not allow him to shoot the ball at all. He got very few shots off, only 7, and they threw him into 6 turnovers. I think Northwestern will try to mimic a lot of what TCU did there, and they have the capability to do so. So that to me tells me Perez should be able to get off a lot more shots and be relatively unbothered for the most part. This ASU team does turn it over a lot, which doesn't hurt you as much on DraftKings, but a lot of these guys have a very undisciplined ball control, and you'll see Collins, Perez, guys like that with 6 to 7 turnovers, which is annoying, right? Only other option I would tell you to really strongly consider here, and will probably be chalky, and as he probably should be, is Adam Miller, who sits there at 4.8. Illinois to LSU to here to ASU. He got the waiver denied initially because he's a 2-time non-grad transfer. Of course, we've talked about it each show, and we at this point should be pretty well versed. The NCAA getting tied up in court there for the stay 14-day window. If you're a 2-time grad or non-grad transfer, you can play in that 14-day window. NCAA just gave up and said, into winter sports and spring sports, you can now play. So Miller is now playing, no restrictions, will use this year and for his eligibility and play the rest of the way. So Adam Miller played 30 minutes against TCU. We saw Collins struggle. Miller did not. 20 real points, hit 3 threes, 2 rebounds, 3 assists, 2 steals, but 20 real points on his way to 31.5. Price stays the same. Matchup is tough, like I said, but Adam Miller really looked nice there in game number 1 for Arizona State, and they clearly brought him in to utilize him immediately. He is going to be a very nice play, and it's going to cut into the numbers of Collins and Perez, of course. That first game there, 22% usage rate, 20% shot rate, 3.5% steal rate. During his time at Illinois and LSU, he's been about a 31% three-point shooter, but has always had a fairly decent shot rate and has never met a shot he didn't like. So in this rat ball-esque Bobby Hurley system, Adam Miller should fit in just fine. And he did get to start against TCU, so that'll make it even easier for most. You don't have to guess what he's going to do. He's just going to start and play a lot of minutes. All right, next game on the slate, Villanova versus Creighton. Creighton is a 7.5 point favorite, 140.5 total. Creighton is a really weird team, man. It's so hard to peg them. Like, betting Creighton at this point is almost off the table. They get just thundered by UNLV in a game that was very puzzling. And then they outlast Alabama, which is Alabama quickly looking like a team that is just going to play their way out of the tournament at this rate. But a real nice one. They are 73-67 on Ken Palm for this one. They should certainly beat this Villanova team, which I'm almost more uninspired by than I am Creighton. Creighton has good efficiency numbers on offense. They are 11th in offense per Ken Palm, 27th in defense, second best field goal percentage, 2-point field goal percentage, efficiency, all that jazz. They are very highly ranked across the board. They do run a rotation that is very easy to predict. We know that Trey Alexander, Baylor Shireman, and Stephen Ashworth are going to play a ton of minutes. Mason Miller is going to rotate out of that 4, and Ryan Kalkbrenner is generally going to play 25 to 30 minutes, depending on foul issues. And then we're going to see Frederick King, got my tongue tied there, Francisco Farabello, and Isaac Trout off the bench. Mainly don't want to deal with any of the bench players in your main build. Farabello, even when he's getting minutes, I know he's only 3.5. He's just such a low fantasy point per minute player. You're really not going to get a ton out of him. I do think that 3.5 price will pull some people in that are looking to do that traditional stars and scrubs build because they're seeing the 20 plus minutes he's played in 3 of the last 4. He is their primary bench piece once again, even though they brought in a few other pieces via the portal this year, so that Farabello wasn't their only bench guy, but right back in the same situation. Isaac Trout seems to be barely playing right now. Farabello getting 25 to 30 minutes at 3.5, I think he does end up being chalky. And he doesn't have to do a whole hell of a lot to pay that price off. Just know that he's very low-end option, but if you need to go there, he's there, and I don't hate it. Mason Miller, same thing as a starter, 4.3, played 23 plus minutes in 3 straight. Also is fine if you want to look in that direction. Otherwise, the 7.5K price tag for Trey Alexander, who at one point was nearing 10K with some big performances in the middle part of November and into the first week of December. He's leveled off a bit, but still the price tag of 7.5 is way too cheap. You throw out the UNLV game, he still hit 30 plus fantasy points in 4 of those last 5 games. Colorado State was an abomination, only 12.5. He shot 1 for 16. Colorado State was all up on his grill. They got their doors blown off by the Rams. That was an awful performance. But considering that Trey Alexander really should never be priced below 8K with what he's typically going to do on a game-to-game basis, to me, he's the alpha on this team, more so than Ryan Kalkbrenner, more so than Baylor Shireman. I think Trey Alexander is the guy in an easy roster at 7.5. 26% usage rate, 27% shot rate, only 29% from long range right now, but still getting volume, 55 attempts, 22% assist rate as well. I am a big fan of Trey Alexander here in this spot against Villanova. I think he will be doing some major damage. Baylor Shireman is priced up over 9K now because of his huge performances. But you look at it, he hasn't really been doing that much more than Trey Alexander. 42 compared to 37 fantasy points. Do we need to pay almost 2K more for 5 more fantasy points? No, and I know it's a very simplistic way to look at it, but looking at their projected floor and upside combinations there and what you can actually expect on a game-to-game basis, I do think ultimately they're just going to give you a very similar raw number. So I'm going to take that discount with Trey Alexander, and they have very similar rates as well. Shireman, 26.5% usage rate compared to Alexander's 26, 27.2% shot rate compared to Alexander's 26.7. Similar across the board, even their assist rates are almost identical. So I'm just taking Alexander for the discount. I like him better as a player anyways, but Shireman is very solid and way less chance of busting than Alexander. I will say that. Ryan Kalkbrenner at 8.5. That's usually when the buck stops for me. He's been really good. High fantasy point per minute player, has been throughout the course of his career. Elite shot blocker, elite offensive rebounder. Although you don't want to ever take his rebounding props because he will punish you. He has had 8+ rebounds in 4 of his last 5 games. So starting to suck us in. We'll see what his rebounding prop is actually at when we get to the end of the show here. And maybe we want to dip our toes back in the water. But as soon as we do, he'll deliver 3 rebounds. And then you have Stephen Ashworth at 4.4, which he has just really struggled in this system so far. He has not been the guy that they thought they were getting when he came over. And keep in mind, he was priced over 8K to start the season. And that was with the expectation, at least on the DK pricing algo and the DK individual pricing team for his Utah State numbers. Well, he had high usage rate, shot 43% from long range, high assist rate, just contributed in all categories, just a very efficient player playing nearly every single minute for Utah State. How he's having to be the 3rd or 4th option, it's clearly not fitting the way he's used to playing. His threes are not falling like we're used to. Shooting about 38%, which is not horrible, but this is a guy who generally shoots in the mid-40s, at least last season, and he's just not giving them the ordinary production that you would have expected from him coming in. That 4.4 price point, though, geez, that is a intriguing look, right? That's a buy low situation there for Steve Ashworth. I think 3.5 for Farabello will have some ownership. 4.4 for Ashworth will probably see a spike too, and that's purely just a pricing play. It's not anything that he's been doing. In fact, there's a good chance he doesn't even pay off the 4.4 price, but at least we know that in 25 minutes at 4.4. He'll take 7 or 8 shots. If he hits a couple of threes and contributes anything in non-scoring categories, he'll have a real solid chance to pay off at least. Villanova side, Justin Moore, got a feel for him, just can't stay healthy. Knee issue day to day. At this point, you're probably unable to roster him at any point, even if he comes back and starts. Like, I'm so terrified about him tweaking and some other current injury. It's just really hard to use him right now. With the potential of him missing the starting 5 that we would likely see, Tyler Burton, Eric Dixon, Jordan Longino, who we do like, TJ Bamba, and then Mark Armstrong. They did bring Hakeem Hart off the bench there. Armstrong has been that fifth starter throughout the season. This was a team coming into it in the previews. It was like, if they're going to get over the hump or they're going to be competitive, Mark Armstrong's going to have to give them something. He's going to have to show improvement, development, and be a viable scorer, not just a facilitator, like a part-time facilitator. And he hasn't proven that. He's 3-4, which is certainly cheap enough to speculate on, but even as a starter, they're not able to play him heavy minutes. And what's happening is Hakeem Hart's coming off the bench in that last game and still playing almost 30 minutes because he's starting to score again, and he's already he's been a better defender than Armstrong over the course of his career, and that's his main attribute that he gives to this Villanova team. You have Jordan Longino there at 5-1. That's a nice price for him. I do think he has upside there. Looking at the various shot rates for these guys, Longino, 20.1% shot rate, 20.9% usage rate. TJ Bamba, 22% shot rate. And then you have Mark Armstrong, 19% usage rate. Hakeem Hart, very low, but he is shooting 38% from long range. And his offensive game has picked up recently, like I just said. TJ Bamba at 4.9. He was a big-time high-usage guy at Washington State. Different role for him on Villanova. There is upside at that price point. I think somebody's going to end up landing on one of these cheap Villanova guys and winning the jam with them. But there's going to be a lot of others with them in their lineups getting, sub 15 fantasy points and ending up with a min cash or, getting clean swept to show for it. So don't get too crazy with all these cheap Villanova options. I know they're appealing. There's some high name players there, but there is a lot of bust potential there, even with Justin Moore being out if he is in fact going to sit. Tyler Burton, we have been riding him. He, the game against K-State, man, very low owned. It was a total buy low opportunity there. Only played him because we got that forward eligibility and he was cheap. And the matchup against K-State, was actually pretty decent. He came through in a huge way. Followed that up with another massive game against UCLA. Now he's priced up to 7-1. The last two games, that's the version of Tyler Burton we're accustomed to seeing during his time at Richmond. High usage guy, alpha type, that gets every shot that he wants. He wasn't particularly efficient in either game, but he rebounded at a high level and the volume carried him. 14 free throw attempts against UCLA. That's vintage Tyler Burton and when he's at his best. 7-1 matchup against Creighton's actually favorable for him, but that is an opportunity cost at 7-1 that I'm not ready to pay for. I'm just going to count my blessings on the last two games and jump off accordingly and let others chase the higher price. And then Eric Dixon at 6.5. That's a reasonable price. He is in play in all formats. Not a huge fouler, so you don't have that risk as much. Playing solid minutes, has great rates across the board. Definitely one of the leaders of this team. Don't mind using him if you want. Certainly has the capability to get the Creighton front court into foul trouble as well. So a lot to think about there on the Villanova side. The other half of the Jordan Invitational, we saw a banger of a game tonight between Florida and Michigan. Might we see another one that goes multiple overtimes between Oklahoma and North Carolina? Certainly a possibility. North Carolina, as it stands right now, 2.5-point favorites. The total is 155.5. That's the third highest on the slate. Looking at North Carolina, man, the game against Kentucky, dud. That was an ugly one. That game had the high total, if you recall, over the weekend. And it did, 87-83, lots of points scored. But my God, Armando Bacot got absolutely train wrecked by a Kentucky front court that had no business containing him like that. Kudos to the job that Aaron Bradshaw did on him. Trey Mitchell took turns on Bacot. They held him to 9 points, 6 rebounds, turned him over 6 times. In fact, he played 31 minutes, so he was out there a lot. But there were literally 3, 4, 5 possessions in a row where Bacot wasn't touching the ball. And when he was getting it, he was not getting post touches or he was ending up, right in front of the 3-point line. Like, what's he going to do out there? It's just totally ineffective. That was the pay up for me that I thought was can't miss over the weekend against Kentucky, and he was absolutely awful. They did a great job containing Harrison Ingram. The only guy who could do anything at all was RJ Davis, and that was because he was just flinging. He was the only one to get shots off, and then Cormac Ryan had wide open threes, which he was hitting. Everybody else on North Carolina was terrible. Looking at the UNC roster, we have Armando Bacot reloaded here at 8-9. It is a very cheap price. In fact, I can't remember the last time he was under 9K. I'm sure we'd have to go into early last year, or possibly the year before. On that reason alone, he's a high-level GPP play because there's a massive amount of upside. Oklahoma is not a team I typically want to target against. They are a team whose defense I'm going to respect. Under Porter Moser, this is a defense that is going to absolutely handcuff, contain, and make life miserable for most of their opponents. They have wins over USC, Iowa, Providence, and Arkansas, all solid games. Blowout wins over teams like Green Bay, Rio Grande Valley, Texas State, etc. They've beaten who they're supposed to, and they have contained. The Providence game, they held them to 51 points. Providence was frustrated, flustered, and totally befuddled by what Porter Moser threw at them. Arkansas was a little bit better. That game was 79-70, but they did a fantastic job containing Trevon Brazile, Devo Davis. L. Ellis was a non-factor. Basically, what happened there was Jeremiah Davenport started hitting threes, and they stretched the game out with free throws. But overall, they had a really hard time. And then the USC game, basically what happened there is Boogie Ellis went into takeover mode late, and Oklahoma struggled a bit on offense in parts of the second half. That one ended up being a closer win, but there wasn't anybody that really went off. Like Isaiah Collier had a tough game, 6 turnovers, 10 points. Their defense is not one that we want to target against. And that to me means RJ Davis is going to be a tough sell for me at 9K against this Oklahoma team. Now, RJ Davis can be considered matchup proof, high usage, upperclassman, has been there before, has faced a myriad of different opponents. Like a professional is professional at the collegiate level. He's a great play overall, each and every slate, no doubt. But 9K is just such a huge investment in this matchup. I'd rather pay down at some of these other options that we've talked about and let others go to RJ Davis. Any other matchup, I think I would probably ride the hot hand, but I'm just a believer in Oklahoma right now, and I think that they're going to have a really solid game plan to at least keep him from totally breaking the slate. Now, they're not defending like we got to keep him under 35 fantasy points, guys, but they're definitely going to have a goal to keep him under 20 real points and let the chips fall how they may. Real decision, though, is Armando Bacot at 8-9, and if he's going to bounce back. And he's had some really big games recently against UConn, FSU, Tennessee. He had a rough outing against Arkansas. So this is something I think we're going to have to get used to this year. He's going to have some of these really just awful torpedo-esque games. But overall, we're typically going to get some really solid production out of Bacot. And I think that at 8-9, he warrants serious consideration even in a porous matchup like this. I'm not chasing Cormac Ryan. I would welcome others to pay the 5-3 price, which is advantageous for him, but he's going to have to hit a bunch of threes against Oklahoma defense that does not allow a lot of threes, or at least they make life miserable. They will run you off that 3-point line. 5th best 3-point defense in the country. So good luck on that for Cormac Ryan, dealing with a team that will be prepared for him. I'm not interested in Elliot Kadu, who's there at 4-6. We just have other values who are below. We could take our shots with Villanova. Kadu is going to have his time in the sun, and he's going to be a really good option for several years. But right now it's just too raw, and all he does is facilitate. So I guess that just leaves us with Harrison Ingram, who at 8-1, certainly a safer option. Against Kentucky, he had what I would consider to be a down game, at least offensively. And he still managed to put up nearly 30 fantasy points because he's so strong in those other categories: steals, blocks, assists, rebounds, all that other counting stats. He continues to perform at a high level there. So this is a matchup that, yes, it's tough for Carolina, but Ingram does enough of the other stuff to still pay off this 8-1 price point. He's definitely at the top end of his ceiling, but he is one of those safer options where I think he's just going to continue to hand us 30 fantasy points. And at this point, with the amount of busts and lineup detonations that we've been seeing over the last week or so, sometimes that 30 fantasy point guarantee is enough to kind of push you where you need to be. So I do like Ingram. He's probably the one that I could see myself rostering the most in my main lineup, but I want to find a way to Bacot, or I want to walk away from them entirely. The Oklahoma Sooners, on the other hand, I'm very interested in. North Carolina's defense overall, they are top 50, and they do play at a very high pace, 34th in the country, but they are just giving up so many fantasy points to all positions. Villanova, when they lost in overtime, Villanova looked like the 96 Bulls. They gave up over 70 points to Arkansas. They did win that game, but Arkansas had several players who put up fantastic numbers. The Tennessee game, in which they won 192, Dalton Connect 37 real. Defensively, North Carolina is just going to get pilfered. Cam Spencer 23 real. Alex Caravan 18 real when they played against North Carolina. And you even go back and look at Kentucky, where they didn't have a huge amount of individual scores. It was really a balanced effort. But Rob Dillingham still had 17. Reed Shepard still contributed in all categories. Aaron Bradshaw was fantastic defensively. They did do a nice job on Antonio Reeves, but that was just more that the entire team played, 15 to 25 minutes across 10 guys. It was just a balanced effort there. This North Carolina defense is not going to be locked down at all this year under Hubert Davis. We're going to be able to target against them. And there's a reason that their games tend to be some of the highest totals on the slate. Looking at Oklahoma, we do have a clearly defined rotation and pecking order at this point. The starting group is Javian McCollum, Milos Uzan, Otega Awi, Jalon Moore, and Sam Godwin. Off the bench, we're going to see Rivaldo Suarez, John Hughley, and Latrey Darthard. That is pretty much the 8-man rotation that we're typically going to see for this team. I absolutely love all of the prices for those starters. I zone right in on Javian McCollum at 6'4". He is such a strong option at 6'4" and has to be considered a core play. I'd love to sit here and tell you he's the posh play of the day because he is that high on my list, but I think he's going to be that high on everybody else's list too. So I have to be realistic with where I think his rostership is actually going to be. Looking at the rates for McCollum, and his PRA has been money. We'll see what the PRA bet is on him for this one, but he's been coming in at like 19.5, 20.5, and that's just been absolute like auto cash. 26% shot rate for Javion McCollum, 23% shot rate, shooting 36% from long range, and has a 22% assist rate. McCollum, of course, came from Siena last year, where he was a very high usage player, facilitator, just everything for Siena, and that is translated to Porter Moser. Part of the problems last year for some of the guys on Oklahoma that we really wanted to be a thing, like our guy Joey Bamsili, but he didn't defend at the level that Porter demands, so he couldn't be on the court. That was the major issue there. Same thing with CJ Noland, who's off to North Texas now, getting big minutes for them. With McCollum coming over, he's doing the things that Joey Bamsili is capable of doing on offense, but he's also defending at a high level, which is keeping him on the floor, and we're seeing that huge success for him. Otega Awe has broken out in his year 2. We saw flashes last year as a freshman, 23.6% shot rate. He's only taken 12 threes, but he made 9 of them, so he's been scorching there. He's not a big-time three-point shooter, but he's taking them as they come. 9th best true shooting percentage in the country and a 5.3% steal rate. Plays defense the way that Porter Moser demands. He's getting big minutes. He is only 6'5", so 100 more than McCollum. Both are in play. Do we want to play multiple Oklahoma guys in a balanced lineup? Absolutely. I think that can be a winning play. As of now, I don't think it's necessary. But taking 2 of these 3, and we're going to add Milos Uzan into that equation as well, is a very strong move. I know we thought that was going to be a strong move for Ole Miss a couple of slates ago, and a few others where we're like, you can stack this team and feel good about it, and it didn't work out. Stacks haven't necessarily been all that great this year, but this is a mini stack that I think could end up being a big-time optimal build. If you would have stacked the Michigan-Florida game, obviously went to multiple overtimes, you would have been really raking in the cash. But this is one that I think is going to be a close game throughout, and both teams are going to definitely put on a show. But the Oklahoma side is what I like more, especially from a DFS perspective with those prices. Milos Uzan, 6'1", so a couple hundred less. Again, defense at a high level, not quite the upside of some of the others. He did put up 43 against Providence, 12 rebounds and 4 steals. That was an outlier game. We're not going to see Milos usually rebound like that. That was pretty phenomenal the way he did so. High assist rate, shoots about 25% from long range. Not the best 3-point shooter. Definitely in the pecking order on shots. He's behind Owie and McCollum, but he is certainly in play there at 6'1". Have to give him consideration. As far as the forwards in play, Jalon Moore, 5'6" is a good price for him. He did show some pop, but that was against Pine Bluff. In these games against upper tier competition, he hasn't shown me enough to really warrant being rostered. And going up against a front court that includes Armando Bacot, I don't really think we can roster him because foul trouble is likely going to happen. Could lead to more minutes for John Hughley, but foul trouble could wait him. I do think at 5'8", Hughley makes sense for GPPs. And then Sam Godwin there at 5'3", who will get the first crack at Bacot. I'm probably not looking at him either. The only other options, we have value here, Rivaldo Suarez at 4'5", and Latrey Darthard at 4'2". Darthard starting to see his minutes go up. He defends. He can score a little bit. So at 4'2", I think he's a certifiable potential main team value that no one else is going to be on. But I think he is as good as any of those Villanova values that we talked about, and minutes are there for him, seem to be at least. Suarez has seen a little bit more of an increase here in minutes lately. Big game against Arkansas, followed that up with a big game against Green Bay, which has led to those more minutes. He is rebounding at a very high level. Suarez, during his time throughout at Oregon, was nothing more than a bit role player. His rebounding rates are at a career level. His 3-point percentage is at a career level. Free throw shooting, all these categories, career highs for him right now. And he has a top 100 offensive rating. So Suarez has also got to be in consideration at 4-5 because we're seeing this spike in minutes for him. And this is a matchup against North Carolina that he can take advantage of. One thing he's done a really good job of is getting himself to the foul line, and they're comfortable using him in later game situations as well, which is something that we've seen. So I come away with this one liking the Oklahoma side more from both a betting perspective and DFS. Javion McCollum is my lock, but I think I want one of Otega Owie and Milos Uzan as well. In fact, I don't think, I know, but we'll see how that lineup shakes out. A little bit of Suarez and Darthard love as well. We're avoiding the front court players for the most part against Armando Bacot because he's still Armando Bacot and he gets the respect he deserves by the refs. He will be drawing fouls at a high level in this one. All right, last game on the slate. I hope you save some PMR because this is a game that is massive total-wise. It's a 7.5-point spread in favor of Arizona, 173.5 total. That's not a mistake. We're talking about a 173.5 over-under. Alabama plays at a style that is very conducive to fantasy goodness. They have a top 3 rated offense per Ken Palm's numbers, 39th in tempo. They've faltered lately, lost 4 of their last 6. They don't play a lot of defense lately, and they play fast pace. Usually leads to a lot of points. Arizona, top 10 in defensive efficiency, top 5 in defensive efficiency, top 10 in offensive efficiency, and they play at the 5th fastest tempo. Fast team versus fast team. You have a good defense in Arizona, but we saw them just give up 92 points to Purdue in a game that really, really disappointed us. Anyone that wasn't named Caleb Love in that game or Kashad Johnson was a disappointment. And that was a game, of course, we were very high on Kylan Boswell, and they did a really nice job shutting him out. The nice thing about this, in a somewhat closer game, Arizona played just 7 guys. They played 8 total, but just 7 guys double-digit minutes. Caleb Love, Pele Larson, Omar Ballo, Kashad Johnson, Kylan Boswell, all starters who are going to play big minutes, typically 28 plus. And then you're going to see Jaden Bradley and KJ Lewis give those guys water breaks throughout. Motius Krifis, the 7'2 freshman who's very raw, give them, some spot minutes, 5 to 10. Won't really need him against this Alabama front court, so I wouldn't suspect to see him very much. Both teams are going to be able to put a guard-heavy lineup out there and let the track meet begin. This is a really interesting spot for Caleb Love. He is so expensive at 8.7. I am really kicking myself in the ass because I haven't been rostering Caleb Love like I should be. Over his career at North Carolina, there was some buy low spots, really good DVP spots, just really transformative type situations for Caleb Love to just at least melt a slate. And he just would victimize us time and time again. And I fell victim to not keeping a short memory when it came to Caleb Love, and I've missed out on some of his bigger performances. 48.5 against Purdue at 7-6, missed out there because I was on Boswell. 41 against Wisconsin at 6-8, missed out there because I was on Boswell. I continue to roster Boswell. I love the way he plays. What can I say? But Caleb Love at 8-7, that's a massive, massive price. Now he's playing extraordinarily well, but I feel like it comes down to, have you been rostering Caleb Love? If you have, then you can feel good about continuing to do so and pay that price. If you haven't been rostering him, it's really tough to now go there, even though the matchup's prime. The total is just ridiculously high. But if he drops a 28 or a 27, a 32 even, it's just such a crushing blow to have that happen to you. And it is capable. And I will say that Kylan Boswell is not going to have a game like that, like he just did against Purdue, where he had 6 points, 3 of 9 from the field, didn't get a lot of assists. Like, they just took him out of the game completely. So I am looking to go back to Kylan Boswell. Generally at this 6K price, I mean, he's an auto 4X. It's just so safe. So I am going back to Boswell, yes. A decision has to be made on how many you want to roster in this game. I suspect people are going to do everything in their power to roster at least 3. 2 is a lock, but if you can get more in, I think people are definitely going to try, because that total is eye-popping. And we know a lot of our opponents and casuals and grinders alike base a lot of their exposures off of total. So this one sticks out like a sore thumb, no doubt. For Boswell, 20% shot rate. He has an assist rate of 25%, shooting 47% from long range. I think he has a nice bounce back today. I'm on Boswell once again. 3rd straight game. Gonna keep at it. Caleb Love, 26% shot rate, 23% usage rate, 22% assist rate. Then you have Kashad Johnson, who is just a jack of all trades. Not the highest rates in the world, 22% shot rate, which is good. He does have a 31% combined rebounding rate, which is fantastic. He has just been so much better in a prime starting role with all these minutes. For San Diego State, he was always a pretty decent rebounder, but he never got these kind of minutes consistently, and he is just killing it in this system. So have to have love for him too, but at 7.5, it's a little bit difficult. He has scored 30-plus DK points in 3 of his last 4. It's just a very big price to pay. I would rather take that discount with Boswell, and I would rather take that discount, dare I say, with Pele Larson, who I've had even worse luck with than Caleb Love over the years, because Larson's a fouler as a guard. He reaches, he checks, he's very difficult to keep on the floor because of his foul trouble. He has played 30-plus minutes in back-to-back games, though. He has learned to play with fouls. It seems like that's something that is at this stage of his career, it's not affecting him too poorly, but it is something that is there in the back of our minds and we have to be aware of. But knowing we want exposure to this game, and we can do it at a price point like 5, 4, and 6K for Boswell and Larson, I think that's the way that we're going to be able to succeed here. And then you have Omar Ballo rounding out the starting 5 there at 7K. He was phenomenal last year, borderline unfadable. The problem, and I mentioned this on the last Arizona slate, is that there's not another front court option to make the defense worry about. And because of that, Ballo is getting all of the defensive attention down there. Last year and the year before, he had Azuolas Tubelis. So that enabled the defensive attention to be split, and Ballo got to do his thing, and he had some really big games in the non-con. No Tubelis means that defense is in his pocket, and he's performing well, but I don't know that he's 7K well right now. So we'll probably take our chances on the guards, either paying up or paying down. But Ballo is definitely not like a full fade by any means, but he's a very low priority play for me. And then Jaden Bradley, who's nearly min price. Is it a revenge spot? Do we believe in that? Do we think that Jaden Bradley has a little extra pep in his step for this one? Is he going to get 20 to 25 minutes? Probably the answer being no, but he'll definitely want to be chucking when he's out there getting the opportunity. So at nearly min price, he's worth throwing out there into some form or fashion in your MME builds. He's not a main team play because of the minutes. Rates are fairly low. It's down across the board. He had almost 30% assist rate last year. Nothing close to that this season, but going up against his former team from last year in Alabama, I could see him taking a few extra shots and trying to put, at least make some highlight plays. His best game to this point was back in November the 19th against Texas Arlington. In 20 minutes, 13, 4, and 2 for 23 fantasy points. Now, he can give us 12 at this price, 12 to 14. He certainly can. We need to get closer to that 20-minute mark, but it's not an impossibility. So Jaden Bradley at 3-2 on a short bench, absolutely. And then you have KJ Lewis sitting there at 4-1. He's going to be more of a dude next year, and when Boswell moves on. Kylan Boswell is very young, but it sounds like he's going to want to make the jump to the NBA very quickly. That's going to give KJ Lewis, who looks the part as a freshman and has a ton of untapped potential, has scored 22 plus fantasy points in 2 of his last 5. That was against Colgate and Texas Arlington. He's 4-1. A guy that's been priced way too high, 6K, 5K, unusable. Now priced down there at 4-1, he's absolutely in play. And this DK dynamic pricing on this slate has made a lot of guys cheap. I think we could be looking at a slate where it's going to seem like it's a no-brainer to go studs and scrubs, but we're going to see a ton of busts, which I do think keeps the overall scoring down. I don't think we'll see a slate where it's 300 to win. I think we're probably going to still be in that 190 to 220 range for cashing. But there's going to be a lot of speculative plays like the KJ Lewis where people are going to say 4-1. He was priced at 5-9. Let's go. He plays 15 minutes, scores 6, and obviously crushes your lineup in a bad way. On the Alabama side, Mark Sears has been phenomenal. He's priced at 8-5 accordingly. Just kind of a luxury play, right? Grant Nelson at 7-3. I don't like Grant Nelson. I think the price will draw people in. I think he's I stick by this. He's only usable against lower tier competition or teams that don't have a physical front court presence. Now he can step out and hit threes, and it's going to be hard for an individual defender like Ballo to deal with out there. But on the other side, if he's having to guard Ballo on the block at any point and gets hung out to dry, he's going to end up getting into foul trouble very quickly, or he's just going to get muscle out of the way and Ballo's going to dunk on his face. So I don't particularly like Nelson here all that much. I think that 7-3 price point will see a spike in rostership because of the high total and because people are going to see that that's an advantageous price for him on a non-matchup basis, just looking at the raw numbers like, hey, 7-3 for Nelson, putting up 30 plus. Yeah, that's good. Got to look at the actual matchup and situation. It's not real great for him, and he hasn't been good in upper tier competition games throughout the course of his career. It's been better this season, but they've been able to hide him a lot too. Aaron Estrada has been struggling by his by his standards. On Hofstra, 40 was his floor. We're not seeing him hit that. Way back on November the 10th, we saw a near 50. He has not been getting it done. He's priced at 6'6". It is worth speculating and considering him. He's probably more of a GPP type of play. I do think there's upside there for him. He could produce here against Arizona. We did see Braden Smith have a pretty nice game, similar status. But I think overall, it's going to be hard to justify using him in your main build. I think I'm leaning a lot heavier on the Arizona side myself. Then you have Mo Wag there at 5'2", back to playing a minimal role there with Grant Nelson, so you can kind of forget about him. Nick Pringle did come out and play 23 minutes against Creighton, had a monster game before fouling out in those 23 minutes, 15 points, 7 rebounds, on his way to 26 fantasy points. He fouled out quickly in 9 minutes against Purdue, but he has been back for 2 games now since his suspension is lifted at 4'6". It's at least interesting. He's going to be counted on to battle with Ballo, but it just seems like foul trouble will be inevitable for Pringle. So tread carefully there, even though the 4.6 price does look like it could have some upside. And then you have Latrell Wrightswell, who before Creighton game had been seeing 25 to 27 minutes at 3.8. That's at least an intriguing price. Like if you're an MME guy or a GBP builder, this is a great slate for you to just rotate through all these sub 5K options. They have a lot of risk, but if they pop, you're going to be so far ahead of the rest of the field. There's just a lot to like here for these guys from a GPP player's perspective. And then Rylan Griffin there as a starter at 5K, playing roughly 25 to 30 minutes per game. He has scored 20 plus fantasy points in 3 of his last 5. It seems like Griffin's really starting to settle in. We saw times where Rylan Griffin looked like he could be a future SEC player of the year type candidate in short spurts. He hasn't really been this super consistent option by any means, but last year he had some big pop games where I was like, wow, this kid's awesome. He has started every single game this year except for the Creighton game. He did come off the bench and play 29 minutes. He did have 13 points, 4 rebounds, 2 assists, hit a 3. He looked pretty solid in that loss to Creighton overall. They did go ahead and start Latrell Wrightsell and Mo Wag, but again, they ended up playing Wrightsell and Wag less than 20 minutes. Griffin and Pringle played more off the bench. I would suspect those two slide into the starting lineup, or at least Griffin slides back into the starting lineup while Latrell Wrightsell goes back to the bench. We'll see how that shakes out, but that would be the reasonable expectation to happen. I do like Griffin at 5K, though. I think he's a viable look there. Not going to get the majority of the defensive attention. Will be on the lesser end of things. Sears, Estrada, Nelson, the defense is paying attention to them, so Griffin gets to run a little unimpeded. I actually like him coming off the bench more than starting, just because it's a bit of a punch in the mouth coming off the bench, and he's going to be able to run with the second unit and have a higher usage rate. So Rylan Griffin is the kind of sneakier Alabama play that I definitely like. All right, so that is the slate. Quick, fast, feel pretty good. I think this is a good one. There's going to be some chalk for sure, but we'll see some spread out ownership on those values, and it's going to be a bit of a crapshoot getting them right. But if you land on the right combination there, it's going to be a major green screen day for you. Looking at the core that I'm going to run out, the number one play on the slate for me, Javion McCollum from Oklahoma at 6'4". I love him. I love the way he played at Siena last year. It reminded me a lot of Jalen Pickett, being lazy because Pickett originally started with Siena. But just a phenomenal player. And he fits into this Porter Moser system so well. Very safe, strong floor. If he'd be 7.5 on this slate, I'd probably pull back a little bit because I don't know that we're going to get like a 40 or a 50 out of him. But he's just locked into a floor of like 25 in this spot. Probably going to get close to 35 from him here on a good night, which I think he will have. It's just going to be a Terminator-like performance. So Javion McCollum, core play number 1, easy lock and load for me. Core play number 2 is going to be Joel Soriano, so paying up there over 9K. Again, looking at the pay-ups, RJ Davis, I think Oklahoma has the chops to make life miserable for him. He's going to have the volume to still get points up, but they can hold him under 20 real points. I don't think he pays off. Baylor Shireman, that's expensive for him. He's been good, but what's the opportunity cost? Tristan Newton at almost 10K. That's pretty tough for me. And then Filipowski dealing with the physical Baylor front court obviously has to be considered, but that's a huge opportunity cost as well at 10.3. 1K less to Soriano for a similar expected output. I will take Joel Soriano as the top pay up option on this slate. And core play number 2. Lastly, core play number 3 is going to be Adam Miller from ASU at 4.8. Expect heavy rostership on him. He's just a really easy play. Even if he busts in this matchup against a tough Northwestern team, there's really nothing you can do about that. You just have to play him. He's a very easy look at 4.8 because I'm expecting him to continue to play 30 minutes and take every shot he wants in this Bobby Hurley offense. So that is the core 3, the slate. We'll jump over to PrizePicks and props. I want to roll out a posh play of the day on this slate. I want it to be McCollum, but I just don't think we will be able to do that. So I will say that our posh play, we're going back to a kid that owes us heavily. Kylan Boswell, 6K for Arizona, coming off an 11 fantasy point performance against Purdue. Wipe away that bad taste. Get back on track here against Bama in a game that's going to be fast-paced, high scoring, a lot of fun. Boswell thrives in these situations. And you look and you see he's not putting up huge scores either. It's probably going to be right around 4.5x, but I'm just like locking in that 24 to 27 from Boswell, and there'll be an opportunity for more. I love him at this price, 6K, and he is the posh play of the day. All right, PrizePicks. Let's see what they got on the board here. They've been giving fantasy points later or not at all, which has kind of made it a little bit tough. PRA is a dangerous one if you're not getting a 17 to 18, 19 and a half type number, like Joel Soriano, 31 and a half PRA, like 31 and a half fantasy points, absolutely. But PRA, that's going to be tough, even though I do think he's going to have in this matchup 20 and 12. So theoretically, he should have that, but that's high. Easy one here. Adam Miller, 17 and a half points, rebounds, and assists, taking that over 17 and a half for him. He's going to be really reliant on his scoring, but that's a PRA number. Like I said, anytime under 20 for a starter like that, I like to take the over, and it hits a pretty high clip. Adam Miller's points props on PrizePicks is 12 and a half, taking the over there as well. He's going to be a threat to score 15 to 18 real points each and every game, and he slides into a semi-alpha role for this team, which is something that we've wanted to see from him for as long as he's played. When he was with Illinois and when he was with LSU, we really wanted to see him take that alpha role. I think he'll get the opportunity here with ASU. And then looking at, let's see here. See what the PRA number is for these guys. So they're giving us a 19. New Mexico is playing Irvine, I believe. 19 points, rebounds, and assists for JT Toppin. I'm a big fan of JT Toppin. This New Mexico team in general has some really nice pieces on it, so I will take his over 19 PRA as well. New Mexico has had to lean into some of their youngsters, JT Toppin being one of them, going up against Irvine. It is a projected close game. Ken Pum has it 79-72. Irvine's rebounding numbers are solid, but I think that Toppin's going to be able to score and do some things. So I do take the over 19 PRA for him as well. All right, bets. Let's look at bets. Now, I know you said, but on your backs, I appreciate you checking back in here. You like the North Carolina side. Respect. I would tell you to trust your gut always. Nice little bounce back for North Carolina. And I might be too high on Oklahoma, but I do like Oklahoma plus 2.5 and the money line. That's just a game that, to me, I think the Sooners will be able to kind of pop them in the mouth early and make them struggle to generate points on the perimeter, which is something that they need to do through Cormac Ryan and RJ Davis. Obviously, Paxton Wojcik has not worked out at all. Big whiff not getting, Dalton Connect. I hate to continue to say that, but just imagine what this North Carolina team could have been had they dropped the proverbial bag for Connect instead of settling for Paxton Wojcik. No disrespect for the Wojcik and his family, but come on. Dalton Connect was the man for this team. Let's look at some other ones here, especially on the late end of it. Howard taking on Santa Barbara. This Howard team is they're playing such a tough non-con schedule that when they get into their main MEAC schedule, they're going to absolutely terrorize the conference. They're only 4-8. I know that's really quite tough, right? But they've played Georgia Tech. They've played James Madison, Rutgers, Bryant, Cincinnati, a tough Penn team. They have played some really hard competition. Now, they did recently lose to Jackson State, which is not great. That's from the SWAC. That's not a conference game. I would have thought they'd beat Jackson State. And then a neutral game against Texas Southern, the SWAC MEAC Challenge, if you will. And they dropped both of those games, and they were close. So not to worry. I think that Howard is ultimately going to win their conference, and then we'll get a chance to use Shai Odom and Seth Towns again in the tournament. But they're playing UC Santa Barbara. It is a road game. UC Santa Barbara under Coach Joe Pasternak has been fantastic for years now. A lot of disrespect this year by the preseason Big West media polls. Not sure why they would think with AJ Mitchell this team would ever struggle. But I am going to take this Howard plus 8.5. I do like them to hang with Santa Barbara. Having Seth Towns as an equalizer of sorts for them. Having Shai Odom, who easily could have played for a high major team had he not had injuries coming out. And my guy Jelani Williams, who transferred over from Penn a couple of seasons ago, he's awesome. Really good for this team. I love this Howard roster, so I'm looking at them 8.5 there. Might take some alt line stuff there too to extend that a little bit. Arizona straight up. I think I would even lean into -7.5. I'm not that impressed by this Alabama team. They've got some pieces that I like, no doubt, like Rylan Griffin, but I think Arizona is the better team. And I know that they're coming off a setback, but look for them to bounce back in a big way. So we are taking that 7.5 there for them. San Jose State +2 versus Santa Clara. This is a fun game. Santa Clara is a team that we support a lot on the Super Show. Herb Sendek has a solid group. They do have a puzzling loss to Cal. They got their doors blown off by Ohio State, which would be to be expected. Weren't competitive against New Mexico, and they dropped a close one against Utah State, which could have gone either way. And then a neutral court loss to Washington State. Ken Pom has it 74-73. This is a home game for San Jose. They are coached by Tim Miles. San Jose is 6-6. They have several overtime losses, a lot of close losses. They're in games often, but at home against Santa Clara, I think they have the pieces to make things happen. Myron Amy has a slid into the alpha role for them. Tibet Gorner and Adram Diong are some solid front court options. Diong from Washington State, all the upside in the world, originally from Senegal. I like them at home +2. That is one that I'm going to be looking at some alt spreads as well. Alt spreads, something that I have been stringing together at the DK book lately, and I was doing that last year too. Giving myself some extra points on those alt spreads and then putting 3, 4, 5 together in a parlay and kind of getting yourself a solid, plus EV bet there. Iowa UMBC total is 177, by the way. That's the highest of the day. Not on the slate or anything, but as usual, Iowa games are crazy. It's puzzling to see why we didn't get St. Louis versus NC State. I would question St. Louis being +12 versus NC State, but I'm not touching that one. But that is one that did kind of raise an eyebrow for me. Same with Nebraska being heavy favorites over North Dakota. North Dakota is not great, but Nebraska 18 is a lot of points. So that is one to consider as well. And then the last bet that I like here before looking at some props, Dayton versus Oakland, total of 136.5. The over is in play between those teams. Both have offensive firepower, offensive punch. Defense is good for Dayton, of course, but I do think over 136.5 is the proper play there. One more, actually. West Virginia loses Jesse Edwards for a 3 to 4 weeks to an injury. They're 6.5-point favorites against Radford. This is one that I really like, the Radford side, taking them and sprinkling the money line even. Radford's 9-4. Their last loss coming against Old Dominion back on November 29th. They have a solid win over Marshall from early in the season. They lost to a red-hot James Madison squad, and they played North Carolina relatively competitive in that first game of the season before losing 86-70. Brian Antoine, former Villanova player and New Jersey high school legend, he's leading Radford. He is a fantastic overall player. They have DeQuan Smith, who is a high usage gunner from Murray State. Like, this is a really good Radford roster. Now, I know West Virginia has Kirk Riesa back despite losing Jesse Edwards, and they're getting Ray Battle back. So that one might be a little bit tough, but you don't lose a player like Jesse Edwards and just easily beat a strong team mid-major wise like Radford easily. So I do like them to cover that 6.5. Again, that will be one I'm looking at alt spreads, and I will put that in the tracker tomorrow so that if anybody wants to take a look what that's all about, you can do so. All right, prop bets on DK, and then we'll get out of here. We made great time tonight. Only prop they're giving us on West Virginia, Quinn Slazinski. With Ray Battle in the mix, I would question Quinn Slazinski's PRA. It's 22.5. However, no Jesse Edwards, so we'll leave it alone. Feel very at peace drinking from a cup like this, by the way. Nothing fancy, though. All right, Joel El Soriano, 10.5 rebounds, -120. I got crushed by 9.5 rebounds of Kel Ware today. Don't want to get crushed here by Soriano, but I do think the 20 and 12 stat line for Soriano is in play here against Xavier. I will take that over 10.5 rebounds. That is one of the top props for me on this entire slate, and I feel really positive about that overall. Ryan Kalkbrenner's rebounding prop is 7.5. We can safely get away from that. I was worried it was going to be 4.5 or 5.5, and I'd be inclined to do it, but thankfully that won't be the case. Looking at PRAs, we don't have any Arizona, just the Alabama side, which is a bit disappointing. I was hoping to get a Boswell like 16.5, but no dice there. Not going to happen for us. Looking at the, where is it at? Creighton game. Trey Alexander, I like him for a big bounce back. I would have loved 13.5 more, but his point prop currently sits at 15.5 at minus 120. I do like over 15.5 points for Trey Alexander. He is a big time play. I didn't core him at the end of the slate breakdown, but he is very high on my list and somebody I will have a lot of. RJ Davis under 19.5 points. It's at minus 125, but I really question him being able to do the huge 25 to 30 real point game against Oklahoma. And I do think the goal of keeping him under 20 is real, and I think they do ultimately do so. So under 19.5 real points for RJ Davis. I don't play a lot of unders, but that's one that I feel pretty positive about. Under 15.5 real points for Quinn Slazinski. No Jesse Edwards, but Ray Battle and Kerr Kriisa are going to be taking a ton of shots. Doesn't leave a lot for Slazinski. So under 15.5, that's minus 120 as well. And then one more under that I like quite a bit. It may be risky because it's kind of low, but Dylan Adewusu going up against UConn, 8.5 real points. It's minus 125, but I don't foresee him having very much success scoring too much. His PRA, let's see what they got. It's 16.5 there. I'd be less worried about his real point hitting than the PRA number hitting at 16.5, so I do like the under 8.5 points there for him as well. All right. So I think that does it. There is a early slate on DraftKings tomorrow. They had the showdown slate there for those of you who were checking out some early action. There is a 2-gamer that starts at noon, 3 p.m. EST between UC San Diego Tritons and the Cal Golden Bears and Oklahoma State versus Wofford. Not a huge amount of contest. There's a 1K to first if you want to have some lunch money thrown in there on the jam. Obviously, Cal being on the slate, we got to consider my man Jalen Tyson, who has been just red hot, scoring 30-plus fantasy points with regularity. It's a high price for him, but I on a 2-game slate, how do you not roster Jalen Tyson or Keontae Kennedy? I think you start your lineups with those two guys. On the Oklahoma side, there is a really balanced group of players, but Brandon Garrison, who's at 5'6", doesn't have the highest minutes number, but he does have a solid fantasy point per minute player. 5'6", Brandon Garrison, Jalen Tyson, and Keontae Kennedy would be my 3-man core for the 2-game slate if you're looking to degen a little bit of action there. That will do it for us. The next time you see us, we will be on the college football side of things. Thursday night, I may or may not have my co-host Jake Kuchek on that one. He is dealing with some health stuff. If not, we will continue on. The show goes on. That will be breaking down the Saturday games for bowl season. The bowls have been absolutely nutty so far. We've been seeing guys late scratches, in games at halftime, scratches. Exactly what we described would happen and has happened. We do get a nice 7-gamer to talk about, though, and we will cover that on a game-by-game breakdown basis on Thursday night at 9 p.m. PST. Then I'll be back Friday night to break down the Saturday CBB slate, and then we will have all the written content for each and every slate. Make sure you're there in the Discord. Once again, posting starting lineups, late breaking news, and processing those injuries with you for the best possible outcome. KK Robinson yesterday, for example, we were able to process that and some other stuff. Continues to be one of the best communities in the industry by far. Thanks very much for you guys' continued support. Remember to hit that like button, share the content and the show. Keep on supporting, and we are going to have a big rest of the month heading into January, if you can believe it. The season is going by so very fast. You guys take care, and we'll see you next time.